Welcome back. We talked in the previous video about why the United States only has two political parties. What about its electoral system makes it very hard for a minor party to break through. We talked about some history, about the five-party systems historically, and the sixth one we're in today. Now that I've made the case that we're in America's sixth-party system, let's talk about what that looks like. What differences define the Republican and Democratic parties today? We'll start with demographics and then move on to issues. Demographically, can you predict somebody's party if you know their age, their income, their race, their gender, their religion, or whatever it may be? Maybe. Not real well, but in some cases. Let me show you some information from the 2016 exit polls. So these were polls as voters came out of the presidential race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, asking people who did you vote for and a few things about yourself. What do we find? Age. The older you get, the more Republican. By a little bit, the effect is strongest among young voters. So that minus 18, if you look at the bottom of the chart where it says Trump lead or deficit against Clinton, if there was a demographic that voted 60% for Clinton and 40% for Trump, well, that would be a 20-point deficit for Trump, minus 20 for Trump. So this minus 18 means that these younger voters went almost 60-40 for Clinton rather than Trump. The older you get, the more Republican. That's been a pattern for a long time. What else do we see? Education. Which way do you expect it to go? Do people who have a college degree or a post-college degree tend to vote Republican or Democratic? Well, as education rises, you tend to get more Democratic, but again, the effect is most pronounced at the extreme end. People who have a master's or a PhD or a law degree or whatever it may be tend to skew the hardest towards one party. And those with less than a college degree tend to vote Republican. How about income? What do you think? As you're less wealthy or more wealthy, which party do you lean toward? Well, with income, there's a clear relationship, but again, it's towards one end. Wealthier voters lean a little more Republican, but +1, that's not a lot. But the least wealthy voters, the working class, tend to lean much more Democratic. How about your next demographic? Religion. We have here categories for Catholic, for other Christian, which is combining a great many different Protestant affiliations. Jews, something else, and none. Those who aren't religious, those who are Jewish, tend to vote very heavily Democratic. If we were to break out other Christian into evangelical Protestants, and particularly white evangelical Protestants, this is a core Republican constituency. And you can see that right here. A 65 percentage point lead for Trump among people who are white and who are evangelical Protestant here. When you combine race and religion this way, you find a group that leans very hard Republican, a core base for the Republican Party. What else do we see demographically? Men and women, yes. Men tend to lean a bit Republican, women tend to lean a bit Democratic. These gaps grew a bit in 2016, unsurprising, with Hillary Clinton on the ballot, the first major party nominee who's a woman. How about marital status? Well, those who are married tend to lean a little bit to the right. There's probably some overlap here with religiosity, with age, and things like that. How about race? Well, given what we've talked about with the origin of the sixth-party system, it won't surprise you that whites lean a bit Republican, but whites are a very large group in this country, and so there's some diversity there. Blacks lean very uniformly Democratic, an 80 percentage point lean towards Clinton in 2016. Doesn't even fit on the chart here. But most other minority groups also lean Democratic substantially. These are very heavy leans. Well, there's some demographic components of the modern party system. Race plays a big role. Religion plays a big role, especially when you look at blacks or white evangelical Protestants. But there's also a regional and a rural-urban divide. You can see the regional one here. Democratic voters tend to live towards the coast or in the Northeast and in the upper Midwest. The South and the Midwest tends to lean Republicans. The Mountain West states are a bit of a mix these days. But this becomes more clear when you also add in the rural versus urban angle. So let's adjust these states based on their population. Let's shrink the ones with low population, grow the ones with a big population, and you can see those blue areas grow. That tells you there's a lot of urban voters there. And the red areas tend to shrink, which tells you there's a lot of rural voters there. You can see this more clearly when you move from states to counties. Here's the 2016 electoral map by county. And you can see these blue counties scattered around the country but clustered toward the coasts. Those are the places that voted for Hillary Clinton. But let's adjust this by population. Take a look at the San Francisco Bay suddenly becoming monstrously huge now, and the area around Seattle. Take a look at Chicago. Take a look at Denver and Salt Lake City. Take a look especially at the Northeast, from Boston down through New York City and Philadelphia to Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Look at Texas, which goes from almost entirely blue in the state level results and with all the county results until its blue counties get inflated, and you can see how many Democrats there are there. This rural-urban split is massive, and you see it reflected very clearly here. Half the U.S. population lives in the counties shown here in this red color. You can get just over half the population from 144 counties. Now, this includes in Utah, Salt Lake County and Utah County. Those are among the most populous counties in the country. Meanwhile, 2,998 counties that contain the other half of the population. Gives you a sense of that rural-urban split. You can also see that rural-urban split if instead of shading every county or shading every state, if you just put a dot on the American map for every vote cast, a red dot for a Democratic vote and a red dot for a Republican vote in 2016. And here's what you get. In the Mountain West, you get a lot of blank white space where nobody lives or where very few people live. But you can see an awful lot of blue on the coasts, big clusters of blue in the cities, and red in these more rural areas. Well, there's the demographics of the two parties, broadly speaking. You're not going to remember every detail there, and I don't expect you to, but you should have a sense for what kind of people are in each party's coalition. Well, let's think about the issues that define each party. There's a lot of ways to do this. You can look to the party organizations and look what's in their written platforms. In fact, I believe I've assigned you to do that. You could look to the party and government and see what kinds of things candidates of each party or officials of each party are saying, and what kinds of things they're voting for, and what kinds of bills they're running. For right now, let's look at the party and the electorate and look at polling data from recent years and see, what do Democrats in the electorate say they believe? What do Republicans in the electorate say we believe? Now, first I want you to pause and ask yourself this question. What do you consider yourself? Write down your answer. Definitely a Democrat? Usually leaning Democratic? Independent or undecided? Usually leaning Republican? Or definitely Republican? When I teach this class live, students have these little iClickers which they can use to vote in class, and I have them vote in class and we record it and we save the picture of their results and we look at it later on in this video and we compare it. So I want you to write down your answer and compare it to what you get in this exercise as we go through some issues. Because what we're going to do, I'm going to go through a whole lot of different polling, and on each one I'm going to say, if you gave this response, that answer is most likely to have come from a Democrat. And if you gave this response, that answer is most likely to have come from a Republican. And I want you to make a little tally sheet like this and tally each time that you gave an answer more likely to have come from a Republican, and tally each time that you give an answer more likely to have come from a Democrat. Sometimes we'll see that voters in both parties agree and tend to give the same answer, but usually you'll be able to tell that a particular answer was more likely to have come from one party or the other. Now, I'll remind you, most students find when we do this that they have some agreement with the other party, and that's fine. Issue publics are a thing. And that's why the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has often reminded its members that there is good in both parties. I've mentioned in a previous video that it tends to put out a message, the church tends to put out a message to be read in all of its congregations in the United States before each presidential election, urging people to vote. And for many years, that message included this statement: principles compatible with the gospel may be found in the platforms of all major political parties. So don't be surprised if you find yourself making some check marks on both sides of the ledger, because very few people love everything in their party's platform. Let's go through the issues. We'll do 3 categories: economy and government services, social issues and civil liberties, and then foreign policy. Now I'm going to go really fast through this. The point is just for you to fill out your tally sheet. If you want to look at these charts in more detail, you can play this video back at half speed if you want, or you can download the slides. But just going really quickly, here are the questions. You ready? Deep breath. Question 1. Do you believe that cutting taxes on businesses and corporations will lead to an increase in jobs and economic growth or not? If you believe that, then mark down a tally for giving an answer most similar to a Republican. If you don't, mark down a tally for giving an answer most similar to a Democrat. Next question. Should the government do more to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor in this country? Or is this something the government should not be doing? If you believe the government should be trying to reduce the gap between rich and poor, put a tally under Democrat. And if you believe that is not a role of a government, put a tally under Republican. Do you think that removing the current healthcare system and replacing it with a single-payer system, in which the federal government would expand Medicare, Medicare is the government's health program for the elderly, to cover the medical expenses of every American citizen, is this a good idea or a bad idea? A single-payer system in which the government covers the medical expenses of every American citizen. If you think that's a good idea, put a tally under Democrat. If you think that's a bad idea, put a tally under Republican. Next question. Would you like to see the next president support policies to combat climate change or oppose policies to combat climate change? If you think the government should be doing more to combat climate change, put a tally under Democrat. And if not, you see Republicans are divided, but if you marked no, that is an answer much more likely to have come from a Republican. Which comes closer to the way you feel? Government regulation of big businesses and corporations is necessary to protect the public. Or, government regulation of big businesses and corporations does more harm than good. Well, if you feel that these regulations are necessary, put a tally under Democrat. And if you feel they do more harm than good, put that tally under Republican. In general, do you think unions are still necessary to protect workers? Or are unions unnecessary these days? If you think unions are still necessary, put a tally under Democrat. And if you think not, put a tally under Republican. With which statement do you most agree? Protection of the environment should be given priority even at the risk of curbing economic growth, or economic growth should be given priority even if the environment suffers to some extent. If you would prioritize the environment, put a tally under Democrat. If you would prioritize the economy, put a tally under Republican. Would you favor or oppose raising the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour? If you would favor that, favor raising the minimum wage, put a tally under Democrat. If you would oppose it, put a tally under Republican. And now let's take a breath. That's it for economy and government services. Now let's do some questions about social issues and civil liberties. Do you support or oppose stricter gun laws in the United States? If you support stricter gun laws, put a tally under Democrat. And if you oppose them, put your tally under Republican. Do you think stores and businesses should greet their customers with Happy Holidays or Season's Greetings instead of Merry Christmas out of respect for people of different faiths or not? If you support things like Happy Holidays or Season's Greetings, put a tally under Democrats. And if you support Merry Christmas instead, put your tally under Republicans. Which of these comes closest to your view? Abortion should be generally available to those who want it. There's three options here. Second, abortion should be available but under stricter limits than it is now. Or abortion should not be permitted. If you picked that first option, that abortion should be generally available to those who want it, put a tally under Democrat. If you picked either of the second options, put a tally under Republican, that there should be stricter limits or not permitted. Do you think that the use of marijuana should be made legal in the United States or not? If you support legalization, put a tally under Democrat. If not, put a tally under Republican. Do you think it should be legal or not legal for same-sex couples to marry? If you think it should be legal, put your tally under Democrat, and if not, put it under Republican. In general, do you think that the country's criminal justice system treats whites and blacks equally, or does it favor whites over blacks? If you think our justice system treats whites and blacks equally, put your tally under Republican, and if you think there are race-based differences, put your tally under Democrats. If you could choose, which do you think is the better penalty for murder? The death penalty or life imprisonment with absolutely no possibility of parole? If you said the death penalty, put your tally under Republican. If you said life without parole, put your tally under Democrat. Okay, take a breath again. And let's come to foreign policy. Fewer questions here. This is often a smaller topic of discussion during presidential campaigns. Overall, do you approve or disapprove of the way migrants attempting to cross the U.S. border are being treated by the U.S. government? If you disapprove, put your tally under Democrats. If you approve, put it under Republicans. Some cities are refusing to assist the federal government in its efforts to detain or deport illegal immigrants. These are sometimes called sanctuary cities. Do you think these cities should be able to deal with immigrants as they see fit? Or should these cities be forced to comply with federal immigration efforts? If you think that these cities should not have to assist the federal government in detaining or deporting illegal immigrants, put your tally under Democrat. If you think that cities should be forced to assist the federal government in detaining or deporting illegal immigrants, put your tally under Republican. Some families seeking asylum from their home country cross the U.S. border illegally and then request asylum. To discourage this, the Trump administration has been prosecuting the parents immediately, which means separating parents from their children. Do you support or oppose this policy, often called the family separation policy now? If you oppose it, put your tally under Democrats. If you support it, put your tally under Republicans. Well, that was a lot of questions. As you take in your tally, let me broadly summarize in crude terms each party's general approach. This won't be perfect, but it highlights the broad trade-offs that the two parties are presenting to you. On government services, things like Social Security benefits for the retired or for the disabled, things like benefits for veterans, things like Medicare, which is health care for those who are retired, and Medicaid, which is health care for those who are poor. On government services, Democrats generally favor stronger safety nets, even if it means higher taxes. Republicans generally favor lower taxes, even if it means fewer programs. It's a matter of what they're prioritizing, the safety net or the taxation. On the economy, Democrats generally favor protections for labor and for the public, even if that means more rules, more regulations. And Republicans generally favor fewer rules, saying that innovation will lead to prosperity if you get rid of the rules. On the environment, Democrats generally favor more protection, even at the cost of some economic growth, and Republicans generally favor economic growth, even at the cost of the environment. On social issues, Democrats generally favor more permissiveness, more tolerance, less regulation of morality. We're talking here about things like abortion, about same-sex marriage, about transgender rights. And Republicans generally want to promote traditional morality, to enforce social roles more. On civil rights, Democrats generally want to help minorities overcome problems caused by past discrimination, and Republicans generally want to treat all groups the same today, regardless of past conditions. And on foreign policy, Democrats generally favor more diplomacy, cooperation, and foreign aid, while Republicans generally favor a policy of strength and deterrence. Well, how does your chart look, your tally chart? How many tallies did you put on each side? If we were teaching this live, I would ask you to report in anonymously with your clicker. We don't have that live, but look at it. Did you mostly mark Democratic? Almost unanimously, just leaning that way? Is it pretty even? One fun thing to do when I teach this live is to take people's self-reports of which party they prefer from the beginning of this exercise and then compare it to this. And I pretty consistently find the tallies move more towards the middle. And that's to be expected. When you ask about this many issues, it's going to come up that there are some issues where you disagree with your preferred party. If you're a Republican, you're not a Republican because you agree with the party on every issue, but probably because you agree with that party on the issues you care about the most. And so when I start asking you about lots of policies, there will be policies that are less interesting to you where you do lean Democratic, but those aren't the policies driving your vote. This is an important thing to remember. There is diversity within the parties. You should have seen that. Every polling question I asked you, there were always Democrats who were taking the Republican stance and Republicans taking the Democratic stance. There are pro-life Democrats and anti-death penalty Republicans and pro-growth Democrats and pro-environment Republicans and so on and so on. This should have been clear in the data we looked at. Remember, there might be things in your party's platform that you disagree with, but you vote for that party because of their stance on issues you care about more. Issue publics are a thing. If you do have marks on both sides of your tally sheet, remember to think about which issues are relevant in each election. Different issues matter in a presidential race than in a congressional race, than in a gubernatorial race, than in a state legislative race, than in a city race. And locally, the two parties compete over different things. Suppose that you mostly agree with Democrats that you want strong public schools, but you mostly agree with Republicans that you want a strong military. Well, the military only comes up in federal elections, not state-level elections. And schools are primarily an issue in state and local elections, so this might cause you to split your vote. You might also look to see whether the parties in your area are different. Here in Utah, the Utah Democratic Party recognizes that it's not going to win votes by pushing hard for national Democratic priorities like abortion and gay rights. Here in Utah, the Democratic Party pushes for votes by competing on public schools and that sort of thing, education. That's the issue where it can peel off Republican support. For a time, this was very explicit. For a time, the Utah County Democratic Party published a written platform which yielded the ground on things like abortion. Here's an actual quote from the Utah County Democratic platform a few years ago. As Utah County Democrats, we believe the family is the basic unit of society. It is through the family that we support and care for each other and share values from one generation to the next. We believe we cannot expect our county, our state, or our nation to rise above the level of our families. And that is, we support the family, we build the community and safeguard society. We believe families should assume the primary responsibility for teaching children about procreation, abstinence, and birth control. As Utah County Democrats, we believe in the sanctity of human life. We believe that every abortion is a tragedy. This is yielding the ground on these issues and saying these aren't the issues where we're going to compete with Republicans. We know we can't win here. This is saying we want you to consider us on other issues. So wherever you settle after college, pay attention to which issues are relevant in each election you participate in. If you look at the Santa Cruz County Republican platform in California, you will find the Republicans there yielding the ground on environmental and labor matters, putting pro-environment and pro-union positions in the Santa Cruz County Republican platform. Well, let's pause and recap so far. In this portion of the discussion of political parties, we've talked about what kind of people tend to vote Democratic and Republican, and what approach each party seems to take on economic, social, and foreign policy issues. I hope you've reflected on what you like most about each party's issues and what you like least. And you should understand that Republicans and Democrats everywhere aren't the same. The competition isn't always the same at every level of government. The terms here are few, just Republican and Democrat. Take another quick break, and then we'll do the final portion of this discussion about political parties. How do parties choose candidates? How is it that we wind up with a Republican and a Democratic nominee on the ballot at each election? See you in the next video.